We're going to move swiftly on to the next session, which is a topic that all of us are deeply interested in, or if not, have some relevance in, and that is the rising AI wave. The title is Ambitions versus Ambiguity. We'll take a deep dive into how artificial intelligence is disrupting the semiconductor value chain, and we'll be examining Malaysia's evolving role in integrated circuit design and high-performance computing specifically. With that, please allow me to first invite to stage our esteemed moderator from Bloomberg Intelligence, Robert Lee, Senior Technology Analyst from Bloomberg, to share his expertise and to set the stage for this upcoming panel discussion. Big round of applause for Robert Lee, ladies and gentlemen.
That's great. Thanks very much for the kind introduction, Anita. So I'm here to moderate the panel discussion on AI today, but before we invite our guests, I'm going to run through an ambitious but short presentation, just try to give you a flavor of some of our views on the global AI sector. So hopefully you can see the slides to one side, and without further ado, whoops, I've already pressed the wrong button. Okay, just a brief introduction to Bloomberg Intelligence. I mean, Bloomberg, as you probably appreciate, is an enormous organization. There are 3 research arms to it. So I work for Bloomberg Intelligence, which focuses on company and industry research on a global basis. So within the department, we cover more than 200 companies, mainly listed ones and unlisted ones as well, across every sector, every territory you care to think about. So we have over 350 people working globally in the department, many of them, like myself, former sell-side equity analysts with, on average, 15 years experience. So it's a great repository of industry and company research that is fully open to Bloomberg subscribers. So that's the plug over. I like props, but I'm not very good at multitasking. One thing, a new initiative in our department over the last year is writing more in-depth industry reports. This is the China AI report we published at the end of last year. It extensively talks about DeepSeek. So if you bear in mind, DeepSeek only made the global headlines in about February of this year. We've actually been writing on this company for over 12 months now. So again, hopefully that highlights the level of depth we go into in our industry research. But moving onwards, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. Well, we're going to touch briefly on the technological progress within the AI sector, and I think it's become very clear to any of you who follow this sector in any details, it's really a 2-horse race now between America and China. I think my home continent, I'm from the UK originally, Europe, there are some interesting startups, but it's in no way a major global player. I think the same is true for Japan, but there are roles for ASEAN to play, as we'll come on to. Then we're going to move on to the outlook for profit and monetization. I'm sure most of you are familiar with a little company called NVIDIA. So clearly, if you're on the infrastructure side of things, there's good profit to be made. However, on the software side of things, I think there remains a challenge to monetize and commercialize things. Because I imagine many of you have AI apps on your phones or on your laptops, but how many of you are actually putting your hands in your pockets and paying for these at the moment? That's certainly an issue for Chinese companies because the vast majority of AI-enabled software products are available for free at the moment. So that leads on to a related point about commoditization, which we'll come on to because I think there are some commodity-like characteristics on the software side of AI. And again, that has big implications for the monetization outlook on that sector. Then we'll briefly touch on future developments and then tie back to ASEAN. So just to sort of summarize what we've seen over the last 2.5 years or so, there's been a proliferation of AI applications on the software side out there. I think most of you agree that AI is a great productivity tool. It's an efficiency tool. It's being rapidly rolled out in large organizations like Bloomberg to drive cost and efficiency savings across the board. That's one of its key uses as it stands at the moment. It's also very good in terms of enhanced search or data analysis, whether that's trawling through and distilling useful information from structured or unstructured data sets. It has potential uses in drug discovery that can really help accelerate research in terms of the pharmaceutical industry. And then looking at a country like China, which is the workshop to the world, there's great scope to apply AI in terms of factory automation and digitization. And finally, there are applications in the medical field as well. So I think there's a significant number of emerging applications for AI, which obviously helps build in the excitement in the sector. And that's led to a CapEx bonanza. If we just look at the 4 largest tech platforms in the States, so this is Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Meta, so we're excluding Apple for the purposes of this. Their combined CapEx this year, 2025, is going to exceed $300 billion and will continue to increase thereafter. So there is a significant amount of fixed asset investment as these companies build out their data center resources and look to build out the infrastructure that their customers can use to develop AI applications and models. And unsurprisingly, the infrastructure companies are winning as a result of this. This shows the relative share price performance rebased back to I think it's 18 months or so ago. The standout company in green is, unsurprisingly, NVIDIA. So they often say within the stock market that stock prices are a good barometer of a company's health. That's arguably true. But it's really the infrastructure companies, the NVIDIAs, those who are tied into the NVIDIA ecosystem, the cloud companies that are really profiting, and that's being reflected in their share prices. The other share prices below that are the Microsofts, Metas of this world. They've still done very well. They've sort of doubled, but by no means matched the outstanding performance that NVIDIA has delivered. But then, so I think, if you're in the world of infrastructure, if you're supplying the chips or related technologies or cloud computing, the world looks great at the moment. I think just taking a more rational view, the outlook on the software side remains somewhat more uncertain and somewhat more challenged at the moment. So why is that? Many of my comments here really refer to the Chinese AI sector at the moment, because if you cast your mind back when ChatGPT launched in approximately March 2023, there were probably few Chinese models that you could name. Certainly I couldn't, and this is my job. And over, since that period, more than 2 years now, Chinese companies have progressed their technology at an extremely rapid rate. And at the last count, and this data I'm about to quote you is 6 months out of date, but in terms of the last officially disclosed data, there were more than 500 large language models in China, of which more than 300 were officially certified by the regulator. So having come from a standing start, China has made very rapid and substantial progress. So I would give them full marks, 10 out of 10 in terms of technology progress. But that has led to an oversupply of models in the market in a China context. And I would say the same is true within other markets around the world, particularly in America. And I think, again, if you take anything away from this presentation, sure, we could dive into the technology, some of the technical jargon, which I'm purposely trying to stay clear of. But I think if you understand AI and the issues on commercialization at the moment, it comes down to basic economics. So we've got an oversupply of models in the market, and I would also say a lack of differentiation between most of their models. Sure, without exaggerating, we're getting new models launched every other day at the moment. One will claim to be better at coding, the next one's better at this on some other metric. But I think for the average user, most of these models' performance is approximately similar. So therefore, there's a lack of major differentiation between the products. And again, going back to basic economics, this is suggesting that this sector in a China context is already commoditized to some degree. And then from the user point of view, there are low switching costs. I mean, I have DeepSeek downloaded on my phone. It's free to use. I use it in a casual way. I don't think at this point it's really transformed my work processes, whatever, but it's a useful little tool. I would say if DeepSeek started charging for that, I'd probably I'd delete it and just download the next free app. So the switching costs for users are low. And therefore, the pricing power for the software companies is also low. And I think fundamentally, this brings into question the level of value add that the current level of AI tools actually delivers. So again, this does not contradict what I said a few moments ago about the many applications there are as a cost and efficiency tool and the potential applications in pharmaceutical, but there is a major monetization challenge on the consumer side at the moment. If we look at Microsoft as another example here, this is, I think most people would recognize as one of the leading global AI companies, and certainly in a US context. Microsoft is going to spend around $80 billion this year. That's a very large amount of money. Now, they have the cash flow and they have the balance sheet to support that heavy level of investment. However, if you look at their annual revenue run rate in AI, and this is at the calendar 2024, they have a fiscal year end, so this is up to the 6 months ending in December last year. Their annual revenue run rate in AI was $13 billion. So at this point in time, there's a big mismatch between the level of revenue that's being generated for software companies, and by the way, this includes their cloud business, and the levels of CapEx. I would argue actually that FOMO, or fear of missing out, is actually driving a lot of the decision-making within these big tech platforms at the moment. So again, in no way am I questioning the ultimate value add that AI brings, but I think there are major questions in terms of delivering an ROI, in generating payback. The commercialization and monetization on the software side remains in question at this point in time. So just moving on, what do we need to try and get things more on an even keel? And what are these companies really spending these ginormous amounts of CapEx on? What for? At the end of the day, I think the search goes on for the killer AI app. So again, most of you will be familiar with Photoshop as an example. Adobe, which is the company behind Photoshop, has rolled out some AI functionality into that tool, and very useful it is as well. But I wouldn't say that's really a killer AI app. I mean, Adobe's not selling more tools, and it's not actually increased the average selling price. So I think as and when we see new generation of AI apps, I think at least that is one thing we need to secure in order to put the industry on a better profit footing. But ultimately, these companies are spending these ginormous amounts of CapEx in search of something called AGI, or artificial general intelligence. This is a level of AI that matches in approximate terms human level of intelligence. There's a whole plethora of data out there and comments from various CEOs and Sam Altman and people better qualified than me. But my own personal view on this, and as is published on our terminal, I don't think the current generation of models can achieve that. We need to see some major technological breakthroughs before AGI becomes a possibility. So where does this all end? I think, again, within a China context and also a broader global context, we need to see a more rational approach to investment. I mean, at the end of the day, I imagine there are multiple CFOs in this audience. It's all about the payback. There has to be a visibility on the return of investment that these things can deliver. So I think some of the investment approach out there is less rational at the moment because it's fear of missing out that's driving a lot of the decision making. I think, again, within a China context and also maybe globally, we need to see a consolidation. I mean, I've made some of the headline points as to why this sector's commoditized at the moment. So ultimately, we need to see a shakeout and a consolidation to put it on a better profit footing. And as I mentioned in the last slide, we need to see these killer apps and ultimately the prospect of AGI being delivered in order to put the sector on a better route to commercialization. So how can ASEAN nations capitalize on this? Well, in the same way that China and other countries are, there needs to be a rise in domestic adoption across a range of sectors, from agriculture to the digital economy to business as a whole. There's a whole question mark about AI models and apps. Does it make more sense for the countries in this part of the world to develop their own sovereign capabilities? Should they license or rely on the technology of third-party nations? There's a whole other question of data centers again. And appreciate here in Malaysia, there's already a significant amount of investment going on that front. And also there's a role for research to be played on the research side. And ultimately, given that we are based in Malaysia here at the moment, there are significant opportunities for the semiconductor, which we'll come on to in the panel discussion in a moment. And without further ado, I will hand over to Anita to announce our esteemed guests.
Thank you very much, Robert. A big round of applause for that insightful context. Thank you so much for prepping us for your panel discussion. We'd now like to invite to stage our esteemed panelists, John Lee, Director of East-West Futures, Mr. Fong Swee Kiang, CEO of Skyechip, James Morley, Senior Investment Officer and Malaysia Anchor for Manufacturing, Agribusiness and Services of International Finance Corporation World Bank Group, as well as Giorgio Migliarina, Group Chief Technology and Digital Officer of Maybank. Thank you for joining Robert on stage. And the floor is back to you, Robert.
Great, thanks very much, Anita, and welcome to the panelists. Should we take a seat? So as I mentioned in the opening presentation, we had a bit of a run through the global sector, really. But maybe before we drill into some of the opportunities for countries and industries in the ASEAN region, maybe I can turn to Giorgio, perhaps first, to talk about, what most excites you about AI and in what way is AI being rolled out within Maybank in particular? Because whilst my presentation was very high level, it's always great to get some real-world examples of what's being done.
Thank you, Robert, and it's a pleasure to be here. Clearly, Maybank is a large company in Southeast Asia, and I think the approach that Maybank has vis-à-vis AI, I'm pretty sure is quite similar to other big companies. You were mentioning Bloomberg before and how you are testing AI to improve productivity. Let me start by saying that I'm very excited by AI because AI has generated a lot of interest in technology, further interest in technology within Maybank. So now you can go to the CXO teams or you can go to a branch and people are really excited about AI and they start thinking again in how to redesign their own processes, improve the way they are doing their day-to-day activities in light of what technology can provide to them. So just for that, I am very excited by AI because it's a catalyst of improving processes, re-challenging, if you want, the way we've been doing business for years. So that's, if you want, a great start. Even though we know very well that AI is not mature yet, and therefore I think it would be quite unwise to pick winners today in AI. So we have started having a kind of grassroots initiative or setting initiatives within Maybank. So you will not be surprised by hearing that we have about 90 initiatives and 90 ideas of how Gen AI and AI can be applied that we are currently evaluating and piloting. These ideas and these initiatives fall within the normal categories that you might expect. So there is a lot about customer interactions, so how to ensure that the customers have easy channel to communicate with us in an effective way. You have a lot related to internal improvement of processes, like you mentioned for Bloomberg. You have also a lot of opportunities for very specific financial industry use cases, like how to improve analytics for fraud, anti-money laundering, or risk assessment. And then there is a great idea that makes me very excited as well. That is, if you are a bank and you are actually sitting on a very high volume of transactions, we process about 800 million transactions per month. You could even use AI to think of how to model a kind of digital twin of the Malaysian economy or the economy of any country. And that could potentially give us the opportunity of having insights that go beyond the normal day-to-day operations, understanding where money flows, understanding where potentially you have opportunities of financing, or highlighting jointly with government and institutions ways of debottlenecking potentially some supply chains, for example. So I find that this is quite exciting as a set of opportunities. Now, how do we go about working and funding AI? I think that AI today needs to leverage the investments of the giants that you just mentioned. And I think it would be, again, quite reckless for a company, even the size of Maybank, to start building their own models or building their own customized infrastructure. So a big element for AI adoption for companies big and small today is to embrace the cloud, clean up their data, and start experimenting with the existing models. And I think since we are at the beginning of a journey, as I said, I don't think that picking winners today is necessarily the wise thing to do. But if you want to start the journey, I think it's very important that you find external partners that you feel comfortable working with, because the models will evolve, the technology, the hardware will evolve, but you need to identify a number of strategic partners that you feel comfortable working with so that you can evolve with them the perception, the approach, and the adoption of AI. And I think this to me is the right thing to do. We are a financial institution, therefore we don't want to double down as a software company or as an AI company internally. Therefore, we want to adopt what the industry can offer to, I would say, internalize it and use it to improve what we're doing every day.
Okay, that's great. Can I just ask a quick follow-up on that? And again, tying back to Maybank, would you see it, as I mentioned in my opening presentation, more as a tool to drive efficiency savings, to drive cost savings within the business, or as a revenue generator, or is it a mix between the two, or perhaps just too early to say?
So I joined Maybank 7 months ago. Before that, I was in Europe. And I have to say that the narrative is very different here compared to Europe. In Europe, my answer to you, and you know very well, Robert, would be AI is primarily focused at efficiency improvements, productivity improvements, and with that, cost cutting. I think here the real excitement is about becoming more efficient, but to fuel growth. And I think this is also very important because you might have barrier to adoption for AI for many employees because they might feel threatened, especially in Europe, by the advent of AI. I think here the narrative is very different. It's a narrative that is very positive, and it's about growing faster without necessarily, in a linear way, increasing the cost and your cost structure according to the growth.
Okay, that's great. So maybe we can tie back the conversation into ASEAN. And James here, sitting to my left, has a huge amount of, sorry, I should say John, not James. James and John. Too many J's in this panel. But John has a huge amount of experience examining the geopolitical environment. So maybe I can just ask you what your thoughts are on, I mean, the arguments for and against ASEAN nations developing their own sovereign capabilities in AI, both on the model side and in terms of the actual infrastructure. And does it make sense for ASEAN nations to maintain some neutrality in this, or to look to align with America or China? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks. Only starting with the small questions, I see. I would say that the region is already finding its way through the geopolitics. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the tariff competition and the tech war between the US and China. But as far as opportunities for ASEAN are concerned, I think that the reality is that ASEAN economies, as I've written in various pieces, they have their strengths, but they are still lower on the technology ladder, generally speaking. And so that will shape the choices that are available. If we look at AI and data centers, for example, it is obviously the case that compliance with US export control regulations and the use of US cloud computing providers and chip manufacturers or vendors is prerequisite for ASEAN countries to participate. On the other hand, it is also the case that for many real-world applications of AI, particularly in the manufacturing and the industrial space, it's quite likely that we will see AI being employed at scale, probably in China first over the next few years for various reasons. And of course, the ASEAN countries already have deep trade integration, including in the manufacturing and electronics sector with China. So finding the appropriate niches with different partners is certainly the way forward. I think that it's also worth bearing in mind that when we talk about the potential of ASEAN to participate in these value chains, human talent is going to be extremely important. Even if you look, for example, at a leading, I would say, company in the application of AI in real-world environments. So let's say with robotics, now extremely well-known, Unitree in China, their CEO has talked about the importance of finding adequate talent, particularly at the high end of the AI talent pool in order to support their expansion. Scaling production is not an issue, obviously, for the Chinese manufacturing sector, but even in a country which generates hundreds of millions of STEM graduates every year, the talent pipeline is one of their main concerns. And I think this is also an area in which ASEAN countries are going to have to focus, building the workforce that is able to take advantage of these opportunities. And there, again, I think very much being able to adapt to the different opportunities that come from the two camps, if you like, is going to be very important going forwards.
Okay, thanks. Maybe tying into an industry that Malaysia in particular has strengths in, the semiconductor, the chip industry, of course. So maybe I can turn to Mr. Fong. Semiconductor industry, as you know, is an enormous sector ranging from design to the fabrication of chips to the assembly and test, which I think is an area Malaysia has particular strengths in. What do you think are the most obvious addressable opportunities for not just Malaysia, but ASEAN nations in general? But maybe more importantly, where do you think, which areas of the food chain offer the greatest long-term potential payback and margin potential? Should it be design? Should it be fabrication or something else in your view?
Good morning. Good to be here. And as a representation from the semiconductor field, I see tremendous opportunities generated by the AI. No, in fact, if we look at semiconductor history, we went through 3 phases and we are entering the 3rd phase. The first phase was actually PC and internet driven. And you see companies like Intel, AMD growing from a small company become a global conglomerate, right? And the second phase was actually driven by mobility. And everybody is carrying a cell phone today, right? But 20, 30 years ago, that was an emerging application, emerging business. And now it's trending into almost like plateauing, right? But very fortunate for semiconductors, we are seeing the third wave. In fact, this wave is even stronger than the last two waves, right? It's called the AI super cycle, right? And it's predicted that in the last 50 years, we have built a revenue for the whole semiconductor industry up to about 500 billion. And it's projected to be hitting 1 trillion by 2020, which is not too far. 2030, I'm sorry, yeah. 5 more years, it's going to hit 1 trillion, right? And for me personally, I think we will exceed that number, right? Just now, Robert was questioning where is the revenue coming from for all the AI model and things like that. But one thing to be sure, before you make money, you need to buy the hardware first, right? Before you're setting up, let's say, a coffee shop, you need to buy your toaster, right? So hardware is here to gain from the AI super cycle, okay? So if I switch the attention to ASEAN and Malaysia, actually this region is very, very fortunate because we started semiconductor industry about 50 years ago, right? We are like the go-to region for assembly and test. Now the question is, how do we ride the wave to double or triple our revenue and our export? Okay? So I see 3 opportunities. The first one, obviously, is why Skyechip and the team are willing to give up their job in MNC to start up Skyechip, right? Because we are seeing tremendous opportunity given the AI super cycle and also given the polarization or the deglobalization of the semiconductor industry, right? And now AI touches every corners and every part of our life, right? You pull up a phone, it's become smarter. You're driving your car, a smarter car, right? You have a smarter home. You have the smarter shopping experience. So the opportunity for Malaysia semiconductor players is very, very broad, right? For IC design, for example, you may heard about NVIDIA and AMD, but is that the only opportunity for AI chips? Definitely not, right? Besides the huge data, cloud-based or data center-based chips produced by NVIDIA and AMD, there are also hardware accelerator that will actually reduce the cost and the power consumption by at least 30 to 40%. And these are the new field that still emerging. And we have smarter SoC devices that can address plenty of applications, right? Make our old devices so boring that we want to replace a new one, right? And thirdly, and more importantly, is also when we have more chips, we also need more silicon IP, which is the building blocks that used to construct the chips. And this is actually low investment, but high return business opportunity. And for Skyechip, and also for many of us here, we got more than 30 years of experience doing IC design, right? Nothing is stopping us to form a company, leverage on our unique knowledge that we gain over the years, become a silicon IP company, or producing a specialized chip to address a special segment triggered by the AI opportunities, right? So that's about IC design. And about assembly and test, this is also a field that we should not forget that we grow the semiconductor assembly and test during the PC and internet era, right? And we almost missed the mobility era because there's not many companies in Malaysia that actually building chips for phone and things like that. MediaTek was in Taiwan, like Broadcom was in other parts of the world, right? So how do Malaysia assembly and test shift our weightage from PC and internet, which is either going down or plateauing, into emerging sectors, right? How do we transform our assembly and test capability to be able to build chips for NVIDIA, build chips for AMD, or build chip for 2.5D and 3D packaging. Right? So this is something that we ourselves as a player and also as a policymaker, we need to focus on how do we attract the new players into our semiconductor assembly and test. Right? And thirdly, it's about capabilities. Right? The opportunity now is no longer just triggered by Moore's law, where you make the chip more complicated. It's now called more than more, where packaging technology is becoming a primary solution for semiconductors. Right? So how do Malaysia actually venture into this new field where there's still very little players and plenty of opportunities so that we can emerge as a trendsetter or at least as one of the pioneering countries who are participating in 2.5D or 3D packaging or testing. So these are the few things that I would like to share. But in order to enable that, talent is number one, like just what John said. All right? And the other one will be, do we have digitalizations that allow our data to be digitized so that it can transform into AI models? Right? So these are the challenges that we have. But we do have solutions because as ASEAN, we have more than 215 million population that's aged between 15 and 35, which is a primary user of AI technology and also primary innovator for AI technology. So we do have the talent, just like how do we actually turn this talent into useful talent?
Okay, well, maybe just moving the conversation on to James. I can call you John if you like, but sorry about that. It's British sense of humor coming out there. So for James, maybe as a representative of the World Bank, maybe you can talk about the role that governments can play, both in maybe providing the financing that would be necessary to build out some of these high-end facilities, and then tying into the points I made on the talent base. Because if you just draw a comparison with the CHIPS Act in America, as you may have seen, the US under the Biden administration was trying to attract an investment into Arizona in particular to build out new fabs. These are new fabrication facilities to build high-end chips. So the capital was there, the political will was there, but there was a major bottleneck in terms of the skilled production engineers that just weren't around. There were anecdotal stories of offers being made to TSMC engineers in Taiwan to double their salary to bring them over to Arizona. So for maybe the two of you, for James first of all, is that an issue that the ASEAN region faces? And to what extent can governments play a role to help bolster the education system and provide access to the necessary capital to fund investments in what is ultimately a very high-end area of the tech industry and a very expensive one as well to invest in?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Rob, and good morning, everybody. So maybe just very quickly to make sure everybody's on the same page. So just to introduce the World Bank Group. So the World Bank Group is a multilateral organization, I guess a little bit like ASEAN. So our shareholders are the various governments around the world, so including all of the big players, including every ASEAN country, and including all the big players, including the US and China, and so on. And the World Bank's mission is really to try and encourage economic growth in developing countries. So our mandate is to try and find ways to support poverty reduction, support climate, the climate agenda, sustainability, and so on. But only in emerging markets, right? So we don't really focus on the developed markets. And then within the World Bank Group, we have, there's basically two large institutions. There's the traditional World Bank Group that works with the government, and then there's IFC, the International Finance Center, that works with the private sector. So we have a suite of different, products and services that we do to try and achieve those objectives. So we give advice. We work on the policy side with the government, also the World Bank, including here in Malaysia and around ASEAN. And then on the IFC side, we provide financing to try and help poverty reduction. I mean, a couple of comments I would make. So, I mean, early in my career, I mean, I was lucky enough. At one point, it was a project in Vietnam we were financing. It was a sugar refinery. And I went round and I saw an old school sugar refinery that was based entirely on steam. So they were using steam throughout the production process. There was no electricity being used. And the modern sugar refinery is electrified throughout the process. So the conveyor belts, the sugar crystallization, the cooling and everything is all electrified. And there is no steam is used in a modern sugar refinery. So that is the sort of paradigm shift. You walk around a steam-based sugar refinery, and then it was explained to me, look, everything needs to change. The layout, the corridors, with the steam base, it's all about trying to capture as much heat as you can. Don't let any heat escape. So everything is narrow, everything is confined. And then an electric-based sugar refinery the factory is designed totally differently. So it's like a complete transformation. You've gone from, a 19th century or an early 20th century production process to a modern 20th century production process, and the entire factory needs to be redesigned. And it strikes me that that's where we are with AI now. You're basically looking at pretty much every sector in the economy and saying, look, over the next 10, 20 years, the production process, the way you deliver a service, the way that a business operates is going to be transformed. Some of those things we can already start to see how it's going to look, but a lot of them, quite frankly, we still don't know. So we're looking at a complete transformation of the economy, I think, over a 15, 20-year period, and that's going to require a lot of capital. And I think institutions like IFC, that's the role that we're going to play. We were financing previous transitions, and we're now going to have to find ways to try and work with our clients to finance this new transition. So what can ASEAN do? How does ASEAN lean into this? I think there's so many different dimensions. I think the skills part is a huge one. I think that's probably even where I would start. So if you look at the skills in ASEAN, when you see, okay, we're now competing in a global market, we're going to be competing with the skills in China, we're going to be competing with the skills in the US and in Europe. So you absolutely need to have an education system that is fit for that competition. And this is, I think, one of the areas where AI can play a huge role. So the possibility that every child, primary school, secondary school, can have a personal tutor to tutor them in the subjects that they're learning. I mean, that's potentially a transformational impact. Then you think about the marking, right? Or grading, the amount of time that teachers spend grading exam results, grading submissions. Suddenly AI can help with all of those tasks. So I think that is an absolutely huge area, and I think that's one where the ASEAN countries should be looking and saying, look, we need to up our game on skills and on education, and we need to leverage AI to do that. Another area, so then just going back to some of the conversation on the panel, so in the AI value chain specifically, so we're very keen to try and support that and to support that in ASEAN. So for the Malaysians in the audience, so IFC has really been re-engaging in Malaysia in the last few years. So we weren't too active in the Malaysian market. We were active mostly in the other ASEAN markets, I would say, in the last 20 or 30 years. But in Malaysia now, we've got a new focus and we're re-engaging. So there's two fairly significant projects that we financed quite recently in the last 6 months or so. So one of them is a huge data center. So Yonder, I don't know if anybody from Yonder is here. This is all in the public domain, but that's a $1 billion project approximately. So it's a large data center which IFC is financing. So for very large projects like that, you need a consortium of financiers. When you're talking about $1 billion US, then it's too large for any one institution or any one bank or any one provider of capital. So you need to have a consortium. And that's where IFC, we see our role being able to sort of crowd in other financing. So it was a $1 billion project. IFC, I think the IFC's ticket was probably 100 million, 150 million. And then we managed to crowd in with a consortium of other banks to fund that project. So data centers, and obviously Malaysia is got a competitive advantage in data centers. I think some of the other ASEAN countries, you should be looking at this and then looking at partnering with people like IFC because, we can try and complete the financing of those very, very large projects. The other project I would mention also in the supply chain, so in in the manufacturing space. So AT&S, an Austrian company with a very strong market-leading position in circuit boards and substrates. So they're manufacturing in Malaysia, and we recently financed them. That was, I think, it's around a $400 million project. So we're financing them again in Penang to manufacture, and again with other banks. So crowding in other sources of finance to try and complete that project. And I think our view is, look, there is an entire value chain. There is that CapEx, those absolutely astronomical numbers of CapEx that are being invested. So ASEAN needs to get their share of that CapEx. And they need to position, ASEAN should be positioning itself as, look, we are a very large region. We're a great investment destination. Yes, we have cost advantages, but we also have skills. We also have good infrastructure. Get the share of that investment, and then get those global companies to invest, and then try and join up the entire value chain. So you're doing everything from manufacturing, for education, you have the data centers, you have the core infrastructure, and then try and capture as much of the value as you possibly can in that entire ecosystem.
Okay, that's great. So maybe just moving back to Mr. Fong and drawing some parallels with the island of Taiwan. As I understand it, and this is an interesting fact of the day perhaps, in 1963, the #1 export of Taiwan was sugarcane. It was an agricultural-based society. And obviously through external investment from European partners like Philips, who were one of the early stage investors into TSMC, with a lot of American investment, again, I think attracted to Taiwan because of its cost advantage in terms of labor. That helped seed the Taiwan semiconductor and electronics industry. But then through a lot of support on the educational side, a lot of governmental investment, the Taiwanese have progressively moved up the value chain. And again, I didn't show TSMC's share price on the charts earlier, but that is one of the top performing global semiconductor stocks, which reflects the underlying strength of its profit outlook and business. So coming back to ASEAN and Malaysia, I think on the back-end assembly and test, which is a crucial step in the semiconductor production process, I would say, or if you agree, it's fair to say that Malaysia's been more positioned in the mainstream. Do you think there is the appetite within the companies to actually move up into the higher end? And what are the potential bottlenecks that they would face in terms of skill or access to capital? Is it something they should be doing and sort of trade on their current strengths in assembly and test? Or are there, do you think, greater opportunities on the design space? Because I guess the attraction of design is it's far less capital intensive, but you do need the people with the right skills. So what would your view be on that? Where does a country like Malaysia, where are the greatest opportunities? Where are the lower risk paths to follow? And what potentially offers the greater payback for the Malaysian semiconductor industry?
Okay. I think my answer for that is we cannot choose one of the two. Right? Both assembly and test and IC design are two very important sectors for Malaysia. One is well established, and the other one is actually emerging. But we do have the core strength that we can actually make it a significant new sector that we can shine. Right? So on the assembly and test side, my personal opinion is that the assembly and test manufacturing have been enjoying from the investment, the foreign investment. So a lot of work was outsourced to our local companies, and that actually have grown multiple unicorns, right? But the question right now is, do we prefer to just stay as an outsourced partner where we're going to see very intense competitions from the regions? Because 30 years ago, you may not have a good airport, you may not have a good power supply, but 30 years now, everybody have a good airport, everybody have highway system, and everybody also have a good incentive learning from each others, right? So for us to really continue to maintain our leaderships, I would say that investment is needed to move up the value chain. And now we have a unique window opportunity because as triggered by the AI and high performance computing, The packaging and test solutions have shifted from the traditional single die, single package testing into multiple die in a package testing and assembly. That's what we call 2.5D 3D packaging. Right? So we should find ways to move into that era and establish our leaderships. Okay? And what it takes will be really investment from the company, supported by maybe grants or policy from the government. Right? But I would say that we should not just depend on the existing players. We should also look into startups and some brave in heart who are willing to use whatever they gain, either from their career in MNC or their career outside of Malaysia in other semiconductor field, to come back to start up the company. So we need to give them the strong support in order to ignite the new era of assembly and test, which is more like in 2.5D 3D packaging, or to simplify, call it more than more. Okay? And the other one will be on the IC design side. As I said, it's a very good field to be in because it's asset-light. Right? You don't need to invest in millions and millions of dollars of equipment, but you just need to find the right talent. And the talent we have, because Intel, AMD, or Broadcom has been doing IC design for 20 to 30 years. We do have the talents. Now the question is, how do we bring the talent out so that they can start up their own company and turning their MNC-trained resources into national asset. Right? So in this case, we need policy, and also we need a lot of venture capitalist support and also ecosystem support. Right? So, but this is not, we cannot do it alone. If you look at TSMC, how they started compared to MIMOS, right? Back in 1980-something, TSMC just started, right? And we also have MIMOS. Both are focusing on foundry business, right? But 30 years forward, you can see that TSMC have established itself to become like the most important foundry in the world. But for MIMOS, I think we are probably still using almost the same equipment, right? What was the difference? I think what I saw personally is that when I was in Silicon Valley, when TSMC started, they bring back a lot of talent to actually grow the business, right? Using their network, using their experience. But for Malaysia, we actually trying to do it in analog or organic way. I think maybe that make the difference. So for us to ignite 2.5D 3D packaging and also on IC design, we should use a combination of local talent and global talents. Right? And that will help to accelerate and trying to avoid maybe, trying to create a TSMC from what we have originally in MIMOS. Right?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, just anecdotally there, as somebody who studied electronics at Imperial College in London in the mid-1990s, and this is 100% true, us British students were in the minority. I'm not exaggeration. The majority of people on my course were either from Malaysia or Singapore. So the talent is definitely there. I guess the country just needs to push forward and try and move up the value chain. I was going to come to Giorgio, but I'll just pause on that for a second, so I'll prepare you in advance and talk about what Maybank's doing to, again, maybe, I know this is a little bit outside your field, and therefore I thought I'd give you some thinking time on this, but you can talk about what Maybank is doing to help the startup sector within Malaysia or an ASEAN conference, and also maybe to look to the VC sector. But before we come to that, coming back to about to call you James again, John and James. John, in terms of all the opportunities that are there in AI at the moment, and this is tying back to something we talked about before we came on stage, we talked about the silicon carbide industry and the strengthening position that the ASEAN region has in that particular, I would say, niche technology, but a technology that's very crucial to the EV sector. So within all the potential applications in AI, What do you see as the most potentially interesting? Is it the EV sector? Is that more addressable on a short-term view? Is it something like these humanoid robots, which obviously there's been some incredibly impressive demos come out of China? Or should the focus be more on the software side and the models and applying, as I mentioned in the opening talk, applying AI in real-world applications where we can generate a more immediate payback or cost and efficiency savings within businesses? What would your view be on that?
So just keeping an eye on the time, for silicon carbide, which is important for data centers because it's a material for advanced power management functions, as well as for electric vehicle sector, there is a lot of production and some R&D activity in Southeast Asia, but it is still led by foreign players. So, as is well known here in Malaysia, Infineon up in Kulim, and increasingly, Chinese companies are also prominent in this sector as, for example, suppliers of wafer substrate that is tied to both Chinese industrial policy and the rapid advance of the EV sector in China. And also, as I mentioned, some R&D activity happening in Singapore, which is encouraged by the government and also involves major foreign players, a lot of European companies and RTOs. But I think that simply highlights again that, as Mr. Fong said, for local players in Southeast Asia, there needs to be a combination of several things: help from the authorities, strategic foreign partnerships with leaders in the field, and also, of course, the generation of local talent in companies which can find niches to monetize the technology and to accumulate the factor endowments that will allow the local industry to advance up the value chain. In terms of real-world implementations of AI, I think that the reason I said that we are likely to see over the next few years, at least initially, a lot more of these being realized in China is simply because the real-world learning environment that's created, by example, by having robots which are integrated with the factory floor. So part of an ecosystem which includes the various sensors, the mobility and tactile requirements for performing operations in the real world, and ultimately AI platforms which are optimized for those functions, is more likely to happen in China simply because all of the conditions are in place there. So not only is a lot of manufacturing, and if we're talking about intelligent driving, infrastructure-oriented trial projects in place there more than in other countries around the world, but also the government has been encouraging development of the various elements. For example, the integrated sensing systems, the software platforms that interface between the robots, the sensors, integrate all of the data that's required for the running of a smart factory. And the opportunity that potentially creates for ASEAN companies, again, will be very niche, I think, because when we talk about the Chinese ecosystem, it is developing in a very comprehensive way, where a lot of the capabilities they can provide themselves. You might analogize that, again, to the dominance of companies like NVIDIA and the big US cloud providers in the data center and the AI model training space. But there will be opportunities for local companies to develop or be involved in some of the optimizations for particular use cases and applications. Because, again, a lot of the implementation will happen at the edge. So in terms of optimizing the software and the hardware for particular applications in different environments. And there again, the feedback loop from real-world implementations to the further development of AI models, which at the moment have been largely text-based, trained on text data, but in future for real-world physical applications we'll need obviously to have a lot of real-world generated data as well as synthetic data, but that will be provided again by physical manufacturing environments, some implementation environments, such as, again, integrated urban management and intelligent driving systems. So for local companies, again, finding those opportunities at the same time as navigating, obviously, the geopolitical tensions between the governments whose countries are the main providers of these technologies, which primarily at the moment means the US and China. Europe still has a lot of major players in many niches, obviously, and also is making some quite coordinated efforts at the governance regulatory level to develop, to build its position as an AI leader in the future, but the success of that remains to be seen. That is, I would say, the way forward, and it's going to require quite a lot of flexibility on the part of ASEAN governments as well as their companies.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And finally, James, in the limited time we have available, maybe I can come back to you on maybe what Maybank is doing in the private equity or VC sector. I appreciate this is a slightly off-piste question for you, but I thought I'd give you the opportunity as one of the key sponsors to talk about that. And I guess availability to capital is an issue for startups across the world, particularly in our home continent of Europe.
Thank you, Robert. You managed to call me James as well. No, it's so let me just provide you a little bit of context before we talk about Maybank. Between 2020 and 2024, there has been $6 billion invested in VC initiatives related to AI in ASEAN. This number is less than 1% of the total amount of VC investments in AI worldwide. So I think that ASEAN is not punching according to its own weight in terms of startups. And I think that there is also quite a concentration of startups in Singapore that had more than 70% of this amount. So at the moment we have Singapore, but less than 1% of the total amount of investments worldwide. So I think we have to do more about that. And if you look also at the breakdown of investment, about 2 billion out of the 6 were in fintech, but about 3 billion were in ICT, broadly speaking, so in technologies that were more related to IT. So I think for Maybank, clearly you have a role in terms of raising money and accompanying the startups through their journey in terms of providing equity, debt, and all the investment banking support. And I think my colleagues are doing a very good job at that. On the technical side, since 1/3 of the investments were in fintech, I think there is an opportunity to work with startups and essentially create sandboxes and opportunity for them to test their technologies together with us. But I think that it's also important to recognize that ASEAN can be a very nice team to create the right ecosystem. Because if you think about that, Singapore today is attracting most of the investment. I think we can rebalance that, but that's the reality today. However, Malaysia is the country that is having the biggest investment in infrastructure. Vietnam and Indonesia today are positioning themselves as a provider of skills at scale. So if you think about the total Asian, I think we have quite an interesting lineup of skills and capabilities across the border to actually compete quite effectively in the VC and investment world environment to attract and to foster startup growth.
Okay, that's great. I apologize that we've run out of time for the audience Q&A. But if you want to forward your questions directly to us or a representative at Maybank, we'd be happy to address them personally. And in order to try and keep to time, I'll thank the panelists for joining us with this interesting discussion, tolerating me for the name mix-up. But, you know, can only get better next time. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. And hand back to Anita.
Thank you very much, Rob. Ladies and gentlemen, if you kindly stand, we'll give you a big round of applause. Thank you so much for for very interesting, very insightful, and different aspects covered in approaching the topic. If you just come together, we'll have a quick photo opportunity. And thank you very much for your skillful moderating, Robert.